Alright then, you guys. Wulong Fallen Dynasty. This is Team Ninja's newest take on a Souls game. I finally beat the game, and I definitely wanted to share some of my thoughts on this one. There's things Wulong does exceptionally well, but almost in that same vein, it does a lot of things terribly wrong. So, with that, let's get into this review. My name is Christian. Do me a favor, you guys. Like the video if you like the video. Consider subscribing if you like some more of this content. With that, let's get into this video. Okay, so I did play this game on the PlayStation 5. I played majority of the game in performance mode. I did get a good chunk of game time in on the resolution mode, however. I feel like the resolution mode ran well enough. I didn't really have any issues too much with playing the game. I was managing to deflect pretty easily. I will say though, when I did switch it over to performance mode, it did make the game a little bit easier, and I was finding that some bosses that I struggled with on the resolution mode were easier in performance mode. So I definitely recommend playing this game in performance mode, especially because graphically this game isn't really anything too impressive, so I don't really think you're missing out on too much. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into this actual game. I'm going to start off with the story just because it's kind of quick and easy to get it over with. The story is not good in this game. The story is very lackluster and kind of confusing. I didn't really follow it, and after a certain point, I kind of just started skipping the cutscenes just because I wasn't invested in any of these characters. I wasn't invested in what was going on, and a lot of times I was kind of just more confused than anything. The voice over acting, at least in English, is terrible. It's super cringe, and it's so hard to just keep listening to, so I couldn't keep going with it, so I just ignored it. So yeah, the story is nothing to play this game for, and it's definitely a hindrance on this game. If you're someone who plays a game to advance the story, I definitely would stay far, far away from this game, just because the story doesn't do anybody justice. If you're familiar with any Team Ninja games, you'll know that their stories aren't the best. I remember last year Team Ninja made Final Fantasy Strangers of Paradise, and that was kind of the meme online for all of last year, was just how cringe-worthy the dialogue was. So definitely, if you're a very story-focused gamer and you play a game primarily for story, stay away from this one. Alright, the next big criticism I have for this game is the visuals. Graphically speaking, this game is nothing to write home about. It's very unimpressive, and it's not something that screams like it's pushing new hardware. With that being said, it does look serviceable. It does feel current gen. It just doesn't feel like it is pushing the limits of current hardware. With that being said, if you're not someone who is super hyper focused on the graphics of a game, it is definitely serviceable and it won't hinder your experience. But if you are looking for that next big blockbuster experience, it's not gonna fulfill that. And then if we're talking about the aesthetics of the game, at first I didn't mind. It wasn't anything too impressive, but it was definitely enough. But overall, as the game progresses further in and things become a little bit more hectic, it does start to get a little annoying sometimes when things are very crazy and your camera angle isn't the right angle and you just kind of see a bunch of flashing colors and the characters kind of blend together. It definitely wasn't the most inspired art design or art style, but it is serviceable. It does do its job, and it's not anything that's gonna completely ruin your experience for this game. Alright, with all the negative out of the way, I definitely want to highlight some of the things that I love about this game, because overall I did love this game and I definitely had a tons of fun playing it, and all of that is thanks to the combat and the gameplay of this game. This game's combat is just so addictive, and it's challenging, but it is not overly challenging. Definitely think they struck a good balance with keeping you on your toes, but also never letting you feel like it is unfair. Alright, so how combat works. So you have three different like melee attacks. You can click square to do your normal melee attacks. You can click triangle, which does a spirit attack, and then you can hold R1 and either click triangle or square, which unleashes a martial arts. So spirit attacks and martial arts are going to use up your spirit gauge, and regular attacking is going to build your spirit gauge. So the spirit gauge is the little bar in your front of your screen. You have one and all opponents have one. And how it kind of works is the more parries and slashes you land on your opponent, the more your spirit gauge is going to turn blue, and the enemy spirit gauge is going to turn red. With that being said, if they start landing attacks on you, your spirit gauge is going to turn red, and then vice versa, theirs is going to turn blue. Learning and mastering this spirit gauge is definitely key to the gameplay of this game, and I feel like that's where a lot of players get lost. Most action adventure games like this are primarily focused on dwindling your opponent's health bar until you win, versus this game is more about building their red bar so you can stagger them and then do a fatal attack, and that fatal attack is what's going to take away chunks of their life. But most of like the boss or mini bosses are going to have very tanky defense where your normal attacks aren't really going to be doing much as far as dwindling their health bar. So the more you can fill up your blue spirit bar and lower their red spirit bar, eventually you're going to get to the point where you can do a fatal strike, which is going to take huge chunks of their life. That's kind of the huge crux of this game and what you're aiming for in all your boss fights. For me, the boss fights are where this game shined the most. Learning all the mechanics of this game and then applying them to the boss fight was definitely really fun and definitely kept me engaged and on my toes. Another thing that I really liked is how different and varied the boss fights were. No one boss fought exactly the same as another boss. And their parry timings and their attack animations are going to be widely different, from some of them flying to the air, other ones are duplicating. It definitely made for very intriguing boss fights, tons of which I thought were very memorable. Something that I really love is how they can take this same gameplay structure and apply it to different uses. And I feel like that's where a lot of people got lost, right? Where fighting one boss was very, you have to be very aggressive and in their face, versus other bosses you kind of have to be more patient, step back and wait to parry when you can parry. And the game never tells you this is how you're going to have to play the game. You kind of just have to figure it out through trial and error, or trying to figure out how you can take these gameplay mechanics and apply it specifically to this boss. And I feel like that created a very wide range of options for me. For example, if I felt like I needed to slash really fast and be aggressive and in their face, I was using my dual swords. And then if I felt like I had to be more cunning and pick my spots, I would use more heavy like spears. And that kind of definitely, for me, experimenting with different weapons, experimenting with different magic and different divine beasts is what made this game so much fun. Something I really appreciated about this game was that even though the boss fights required mastery of the mechanics, the weaker enemies scattered across the map were definitely easier to just mow down, and it kind of made for just like mindless fun whenever you needed a break from the bosses or if you needed to grind out some levels. Overall, I feel like this game is struggling to find an audience, mainly because I feel like it's being marketed as a Souls game, and I feel like as a Souls game, it fails. It does not hit the mark that I think people who traditionally play things like Demon Souls or Dark Souls or even Sekiro want from a Souls game, where it kind of just feels more like a hack and slash with Souls elements in it. Like, it has difficult boss fights, it has mastering of patterns and parrying, it has that kind of revenge nemesis system where you have to go and kill the enemy that killed you last so you can get your points again. It definitely has things Souls adjacent, but that's definitely not the market for this game, I feel. For example, I'm someone who does not like playing Souls games typically. I played Elden Ring and I had some fun. I didn't really like Demon Souls or Dark Souls, and I have yet to try Sekiro. But typically speaking, I don't like those type of games, and I feel like I do like the mechanics of those and the ideas of those games, but combat for me in those games always feel a little stiff. Versus in this game, if you're if you have the blue bar, if you had the advantage as far as the spirit gauge goes, this game definitely feels a lot more like a hack and slash. You definitely have to be on your toes a little bit more than the typical hack and slash, where at any moment the enemy can parry you or like do a one hit kill type of move. And so you definitely have to be ready for those animations. But there are definitely a lot of key giveaways that let you know when that's about to happen, and it definitely allows you to prepare yourself with ample enough time. So I feel like overall, it is a phenomenal game as far as gameplay goes. The gameplay is addicting. It is definitely my favorite part of this game. and it definitely makes me forget about things like the visuals or the lack of story, or even the fact that some of the bosses were kind of stressful and I had to retry them multiple times. But it definitely felt rewarding when I did go and beat the boss. Something I feel like is the biggest problem with this game, however, though, is the lack of identity this game seems to have. I feel like it wants to be too many things and it's not really doing any of them phenomenal. Without a strong main character or story elements to get story based game players invested in struggling through these bosses, or without it being Souls enough for Souls gamers to get into it, or hack and slashy enough for hack and slash players to get into it, it's definitely going to struggle to find an audience and a key demographic. I will say, however, if you're just a fan of fun games that are very challenging but very rewarding, this is definitely a good game to get. Definitely, if you could look past things like story and visuals in exchange for really addicting combat, and if you want to take the time to experiment and learn different ways to play this game, it is definitely a must buy. I feel like this game is best for people who love challenging fights, someone who is willing to experiment and keep learning the game, because at no point from the beginning to the end did I feel like I truly mastered this game. There would just be moments where I feel like I mastered a boss fight, and I would get to another boss fight, and then same thing, I would have to relearn how to fight this boss, and it kind of almost felt like I was playing a different game at times, which for me I really enjoyed. It kept me on my toes, but I can get it how it could be super stressful for someone who feels like they have mastery of a game to only be struck down because the things that apply to one boss fight do not apply to this boss fight. So overall, I get why there's a lot of criticism against this game. And if you're one of those people who do not want to experiment or invest a little bit of time into learning each new fight, I definitely would stay away from this game. However, if you're more of a curious gamer, if you're more willing to try things a little differently, definitely give this game a shot. I definitely recommend it. With all that being said, those are my final thoughts on Wulong Fallen Dynasty. Let me know down below if you guys picked this up or if you guys are interested in picking this up. And with that, I'll see you guys on the next video.